Okay, we're back. We're going to finish up tonight the prime point. Before I get started, though, I want to make mention one more time. This is going to be the third evening, and I'm sorry we had to not be here last week. We had a huge emergency at like 4 in the afternoon. We had plumbing problems that lasted until midnight last week. So I'm sorry that we weren't here last week. So this will be actually the third reading of chapter 7 of book 2, the prime point. I want to again emphasize, we had an unfortunate situation where a camera went out a month ago, and subsequently there was dictionary definitions and orally transmitted teachings that were given on the front end of me starting to read this chapter, and there are 30 viewers now that have viewed the text but haven't viewed that information. And it's getting frustrating for me. At some point, I'm just going to reread it again. You know, if I don't see people catch up. If you think you're you're listening to this chapter and you're doing it without understanding those things as part of your reading or you're listening to this chapter, you're missing a huge point. So I'm only saying this for your benefit. Please go back to point to 1 of 2. From that prime point. The prime point will show 2 of 2. Let's watch 1 of 2. That's a full hour of explanation that you need to be clear on. Last week we were just finishing. We're going to start out on page 864. All right, starting right here is where we're going to start in the book. Now, before I get to that, the reason that I stopped on 864 before, and the previous point that I had stopped was where he was talking about the temporary gathering of the 5 components. I wanted to start out by making sure that everybody understood that point. Pardon me. Yeah. On page 860, when he talked about reborn is a very misleading word, and I qualified to everybody, why did he just say that? And so very quickly, 5 components. All right, let me, that's a 5 symbol previous, here we go. Let me start out by reading from the dictionary, again, about the 5 components so that you all understand. Why is the 5 components important? What's the 5 components really a part of? What's the most profound thing that the 5 components is a key element to? Ichen and Sanzen, okay? Because you can't have 3,000 realms in a single moment of life without the 3 realms. And the 5 temporary gathering of the 5 components is the first of the 3 realms. Okay, so I know I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's important for us to understand that the predication of the theory of who we are as living entities is the fact that we karmically remanifest, okay, in an incarnate state in a lifetime. And then when we die, we go into non-substantiality, and this temporary gathering, the 5 components that was represented by our physical form in the life that we lived, all right, dissipates back into the universe, but it does not cease to exist. That's the point of we never die, okay? We go into a state of non-substantiality, and then based on causes and conditions, in a next lifetime, those temporary gathering of the 5 components that are influenced by the karmic base of the life that we are, our original state, that original entity, okay, come back together, and those causes and conditions are reflective of the cause of the change that would have occurred going from one lifetime to another lifetime, right? Because if you manifest from one life into a next life, there had to be causality involved. Nothing can remain the same. You can't be exactly the same. Nothing can stay the same. All right. So just real quick, because most people don't know about the 5 components. It's sort of an obscure concept, but it's integral. It's integral to the fact that you are a Buddha. All Buddhas manifest as temporary gatherings of the 5 components. Okay? So dig it. 5 components. Also, 5 components of life, or 5 aggregates, or the 5 skandhas. The 5 components are form, perception, conception, volition, and consciousness. Buddhism holds that these constituent elements unite temporarily to form an individual living being. So that's the reason I'm reading. Understand, this is what you are right now. Together, they also constitute one of the 3 realms of existence, the other 2 being the realm of living beings and the realm of the environment. The 5 components are form, means the physical aspect of life and includes the 5 sense organs, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body, with which one perceives the external world. Okay? Because of those physical aspects, the 5 sense organs, one is able to perceive. Okay? So the second of the 5 temporary gathering is perception, because those first 5, the first component allowed you to perceive, or to actually have the second component of perception. So perception is the function of receiving external information through the 6 sense organs, our eyes, our skin, our form. This is all the 6th one, okay? The 5 sense organs plus the mind, which integrates the impressions of the 5 senses. The third of the 5 components is the conception. Conception is the function of creating mental images and concepts out of what has been perceived. So we've got form, perception, conception are the first 3. Volition is the will that acts on the conception, okay, and motivates action. So again, conception leads to volition. And then volition leads to consciousness. Consciousness is the 5th. That's the cognitive function of discernment that integrates the 5 components of or the 4 other components of perception, conception, and volition, of form, and perception, conception, and volition. Form represents the physical aspect of life, while perception, conception, and volition and consciousness represent the spiritual aspect. Excuse me, I misspoke a moment ago. Because the physical and spiritual aspects of life are inseparable, there can be no form without consciousness, and no consciousness without form. All life carries on its activities through the interaction of these 5 components. That means karmically they exist in all things. All right? All life carries on its activities through the interaction of these 5 components. Their workings are colored by the karma one formed in previous lifetimes, and at the same time create new karma. All right? Now, what I was really wanting to get into, though, the reason I've got the dictionary out to this is we're going to be talking about the different schools tonight, the 5 senior priests, which is what actually segues. That's how we got these different schools of Nichiren Buddhism. So President Toda is going to lay a bunch of stuff on you that I almost guarantee you've never heard before. And so before he starts talking about it and saying it for the first time, that you'll have heard it, I want to read to you that it's already here. It's just that you've never taken the time, those of you that don't know this, you've never taken the time to know this. Okay? It's all there. You just have to take the time to know it. All right, so let's go back to the 5 senior priests that were out in the outlying area. Again, there were 6 senior priests. Nico Nikko is one, okay? He was the designated successor because he was always at Nichiren's side, while the other 5 were older guys that went out into different areas of the geographic country of Japan, and then they had their own thing in those areas. They were the leader of those areas. So 5 senior priests, 5 of the 6 senior priests, excluding Nico Nikko, designated by Nichiren shortly before his death as his principal disciples. They are Nisho, Nichiro, Nico with 1 K. Remember, he came back, and Nico Nikko took him back in. Nicho and Nichiji. On the 8th day of the 10th month of 1282, at the residence of his lay follower and supporter, Ikegami Muanaka in Musashi province, Nichiren named 6 senior priests whom he entrusted with the responsibility of propagation in their respective areas after his death. He selected them because of the outstanding efforts and contributions they had made to the dissemination of his teachings. Among them, he formally designated Nico Nikko as his successor. After Nichiren's death, however, the other 5 refused to follow Nikko, Nikko, who was also younger than any of them. All right? They gradually departed from Nichiren's teachings, compromising with schools their teacher had refuted as erroneous and misleading. Okay, do you understand? So they call themselves Nichiren Buddhists, but they really aren't Nichiren Buddhists, okay? Because they believe that the original teacher is Shakyamuni, which Nichiren qualified, okay? So this is going to go, okay? So why did, when Kuan-ji had been created by Nichiren Daishonin himself, okay, on Minobu, as his designated successor and sidekick, and who had been living there all those years that Nichiren had been living there. Nikko, Nikko. It had to have taken a lot for him to leave Kuan-ji, right? So the bottom line is that he had a very substantial and specific reason. It wasn't something minor. It was something that he considered a violation of the core of the Daishonin's teachings, okay, as he understood them, having been with Nichiren for all that time, right next to him, every time he did everything. So that's why I'm reading this. Okay, so after Nichiren's death, however, the 5 refused to follow Nikko. They gradually departed from Nichiren's teachings, compromising with schools their teacher had refuted as erroneous and misleading. On refuting the 5 priests, completed in 1328 by Nichijun, the second chief instructor of Osamoto Seminary, describes the differences between Nikko and the 5 senior priests from 6 viewpoints. Now, again, this had all been laid out by Nikko, Nikko, and it was, just like many things, just like the orally transmitted teachings. He's not the one that wrote his teaching down. Nikko wrote this down, the orally transmitted teachings, right? You got it? And it's the same way with Shakyamuni for everything that he said. Same thing with Tiantai as far as Chang'an is concerned. I could go on and go on and go on. There's nothing about original authorship that changes this reality. Okay. He says, from these 6 viewpoints, Nikko, Nikko said, you guys screwed up. You missed the point of what the master was saying all this time. 1, while the 5 officially declared themselves to be priests of the Tendai school, Nikko, Nikko, identified himself as a disciple of Nichiren, whom he regarded as the reincarnation of Bodhisattva's superior practices. Okay? His true identity, or the identity that is revealed in the Lotus Sutra. All right? While the 5 belittled those letters of Nichiren that were written to, this is the second point. Number 1, you don't recognize him as the master. You're talking about Tentai as your master. You got your head way up your ass, guys. All right? 2, while the 5 belittled those letters of Nichiren that were written in a mixture of Chinese characters and Japanese kana syllabary, Nikko treasured them, calling them Gosho. So what we have left to read that's not in classical Chinese in its original text is only because of Nikko Shonin. Okay? They trashed all those documents. Nikko treasured them, calling them Gosho, honorable writings. In those days, formal documents were written in classical Chinese, and the other 5 senior priests felt it beneath Nichiren's status to have written in something other than classical Chinese. They actually destroyed his writings that were not in classical Chinese. I know, you got your mouth wide open. That's why I'm reading this. Most people don't know this. Okay, 3. While the 5 regarded the theoretical first half and the essential teaching, latter half of the Lotus Sutra, as equal in merit, okay, which the Ongikuden says, no way, Jose, right? Nikko held that the former is inferior to the latter, and so did Nichiren. Why? The first 14 chapters only reveal theoretical Ichinen Sanzen. It is only the last 14 chapters that reveal the attainment of Buddhahood in one's present form. Okay, that's the whole difference between the Buddhism sowing and Buddhism harvest right there. Okay, elementally. While the five regarded the theoretical first half and the essential teaching of Lotus Sutra as equal in merit, Nikko held that the former is inferior to the latter, as his master had taught him. 4. While the five revered images of Shakyamuni Buddha as the object of devotion, Nikko revered Nichiren's mandala, the Gohonzon. Okay, so because don't forget, the Daishonin didn't start really inscribing Gohonzon until Sado Island. These priests had these senior guys had been with him way before the exile. Okay, they had all been utilizing various objects of devotion. They didn't switch over to understanding, the master is leaving something for the future, okay, in the form of the Gohonzon as a correct object of devotion to eliminate this confusion between the Buddhism of harvest and Buddhism of sowing. Okay? So, he says, while the five revered images of Shakyamuni Buddha as object of devotion, Nikko revered Nichiren's mandala, the Gohonzon. Fifth point, while the five read the entire Lotus Sutra in their practice, Nikko recited only the key chapters, the expedient means and lifespan chapters. Can you imagine what it would be like if we had to recite this as part of our formal practice every day? Okay? The only people that would be doing this are people that don't work. The only people that would be doing this are people that were priests that we were giving money to bless us since they could do it and we couldn't. Because also this is so obtuse almost in terms of being understandable. It never could happen. The 2nd and the 16th chapter are very understandable, and I'm going to read them to you in the coming weeks. All right? The five read, the entire Lotus Sutra, Nikko 2nd and 16th, as Nichiren had qualified. And then 6, while the five worshipped at Shinto shrines, because there's still an emperor, right? Right? Mm-hmm. While the five worshipped at Shinto shrines, Nikko in IKKO prohibited such worship. Okay? So Nikko established this thing that President Makaguchi and President Toda went out to the head temple, Taiseka-ji, and remonstrated with the head of Nichiren Shoshu and said, you've taken on the Shinto talisman of the emperor, and you're putting that like everybody else, and you can't do that. And that's what got them both put in prison. Yet it's Nikko Shonin, the founder of that school, that qualifies in this on refuting the five priests. It says, no. You cannot mix Shintoism, regardless of our respect for the emperor as Japanese people. No. Okay, so I just thought I would share that with you so you'd understand a little more about why this issue of why the priesthood, why the issues with the priesthood occurred, okay? And then it extended because not only did Nichiren Shoshu not stay pure, they created the greatest slander by excommunicating all the believers that were actually practicing the Buddhism of sowing. All right? None of the other schools practice Buddhism of sowing. You do understand that, right? Because of what I just told you.
Yes.
All right, so let me go back now to page 864, and I'm actually going to start at 863. I'm going to read as fast as I can. All right, going back to page 863, the second full paragraph. I'm reading this only because this conveys something that if it's true for Josei Toda, it's true for you too. It's true for me too. It's true for everybody too. All right? Understand this. So I'm going back a little bit. Toda proceeded, again, don't forget everybody, we're continuing this lecture that I've been reading, right? Toda proceeded with his lecture without the slightest hesitation, confident of the correctness of his own awakening. And the reason I want to start here is, again, what I'm reading is from Josei Toda. There was no Nichiren Shoshu priest that taught him this in an oko. This wasn't learned casually. This was learned through seeking. This was learned through the seeking of his life while he was in prison. Toda proceeded with his lecture without the slightest hesitation. This is the Soka philosophy that's being professed here. confident of the correctness of his own awakening, filtered through Toda's explanation. Even the most esoteric Buddhist terms were completely divested of obtruseness and transformed into words of everyday use. Perhaps no other person had ever given a lecture that embraced such a profound philosophy, yet was so connected so directly to the true nature of human life. For Toda, the correct teaching of Buddhism existed in the reality of life itself. Mr. Lee, he was not applying Buddhist principles to actual life. He didn't need to do so because he had learned through his own enlightenment that the essence of Buddhism was one and the same with the reality of life. That's why you don't have to understand all of this to be the Buddha in your present form. Okay? Only requires faith. Now, to teach as many people as you're going to teach, you're going to want to know all this, but that's not a prerequisite. Knowledge of a certain level isn't the thing that opens the door or gets you even in the door. It's your faith. And it's the heart that's important. That's what the Daishonin teaches us. It is no accident that Toda began to understand the profundity of the Lotus Sutra while enduring the torment of prison life. Not while he had studied it, while he was, having an easy life. He discovered that the truth to which he had been awakened was in itself the supreme principle for the salvation of modern society. This brilliant discovery would develop into a great current of philosophy that would flow unceasingly through the latter half of his career. People overlook this extraordinary truth. The majority of those who had known Toda during the first half of his life failed to recognize this discovery. Even those few who dimly perceived it could not believe that he had discovered the law for the revolution of human life. Those who met Toda for the first time in the latter half of his career were still immature in their faith. They merely stood agape and marveled at the powerful strength of his persuasion, their minds too small to delve into the source of that strength. Now, more than a dozen years after his death, they had begun to realize, though not yet clearly, the wellspring of his persuasive power. What's that mean? Now, more than a dozen years after his death, they have begun to realize, though not yet clearly, the wellspring of his persuasive power. It's his faith. That's the point. Toda's sublime experience, that's the wellspring, that's the source of his power. That's the source of his wisdom. That's the source of his compassion. Toda's sublime experience. What creates wisdom?
Faith.
Compassion. That's what I'm trying to say. Compassion is what leads to wisdom. Wisdom doesn't lead to compassion. You don't get smarter and become compassionate.
Yes.
You become compassionate and you become wise.
Right.
That's the point. Toda's sublime experience in prison awakened him. Because he'd already read all this. We already know. He's already talked about how he's read all this. Awakened him to his mission for which he was born in this world. Now, what's that state then? What is this point?
You understand he's the
When
Buddha.
you realize your mission, which creates what? Your personal identity. You have qualified yourself as a bodhisattva of the earth. The minute you say, I have a mission for Kosen Rufu, the minute you believe you have a mission for Kosen Rufu, you're a freaking bodhisattva of the earth.
Yes.
Okay? Nobody but bodhisattvas of the earth come to that understanding. Period. They have no predication to. They have no path to it. Okay? That is the teaching. That's what we're all being led to, is that understanding. Toda's sublime experience in prison awakened him inwardly, the thing that you can't put in words, to the mission for which he was born in this world. Outwardly, it established itself as an indestructible principle for the salvation of humanity. Since that time, his speech and action have become a force both visible and unseen, releasing people from the depths of the sea of suffering and delivering them to the shore of a new life. How's it both visible and unseen? His speech and action became a force both visible and unseen, releasing people from the depths of the sea of suffering and delivering them to the shore of a new life. How could he? Since that time, his speech and action became a force both visible and unseen. How could it become a force unseen? It took root in the lives of the people that he was teaching, and that's how they taught. They became mentors. You don't know that I know all the stuff that I know because I was taught correctly by a person of correct faith. That's the point. Okay? This unseen effect is what you have when you do shakabuku, when you carry on the baton, when you live your life for Kosen Rufu. Your very speech and action also becomes an unseen influence that relieves the sea, releases people from the depths of the sea of suffering. Okay? Because you continue the process of the truth being shared. The lecture provided Toda with precious... Do you understand what I was just saying?
Yes.
Okay. The lecture provided Toda with precious opportunities to share his understanding. The Soka philosophy. When the lecture progressed smoothly and ended earlier than the scheduled hour, he would welcome as many questions as time permitted and gave detailed, sincere answers. At one such post-lecture session, a bespectacled man in his 30s rose and asked a question. Clad in shabby and well-worn suit, he spoke as if he had brooded over some problem. And this is where we actually let off. Okay, I got to read really fast. The guides for believers of the Fuji school in the Gosho, he said, gives the reasons why Nikko Shonin broke with the 5 other priests. One of the reasons I understand was that the 5 priests treated the Gohonzon as a mere mandala, and when people died, they would bury it together with the body. From many of the Daishonin's letters, we clearly see what a great value he put on the Gohonzon. It mystifies me, therefore, that such learned personages as the 5 senior priests failed to grasp its importance. Would you explain this, please? Okay, now I just listed all that stuff. How could they have all been confused on so many issues? The President Toda is going to explain. A pleasant smile spread over Toda's face. Page 865. That is a very good question. Thank you, he said as he turned toward the questioner and bowed slightly. This question includes not just one but several points that must be made clear. He began. In the first place, the 5 senior priests, the 5 priests did not serve at the Daishonin's side long enough to reach the profound state of oneness between mentor and disciple. Certainly, all of them devoted themselves to the Daishonin and carried out the propagation of his Buddhism, but they had only a short time to learn the correct teachings directly from him. That's why the Ongi Kuden, when I was reading the last thing I read, that's why I said that's the whole thing that separates everything. We've got the orally transmitted teachings. If you don't have the orally transmitted teachings, you can't possibly understand the correct teaching of the Buddhism of sowing. He goes, in the second place, they could not grasp a true perspective of the Daishonin's Buddhism because they were not at his side during the most vital stages of his life. Okay? When he was about to be killed and when he was about to be, when he was on Sado and everybody's trying to off him. Okay? They didn't have to deal with any of that. He says, again, in the second place, they could not grasp a true perspective of the Daishonin's Buddhism because they were not at his side during the most vital stages of his life. Nichiren Daishonin first established the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which is always the confusing thing. People think that the Gohonzon came from Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. No. Nam-myoho Renge-kyo comes from the Gohonzon. Even the Gohonzon wasn't revealed until way after that. He's going to explain all this. Nichiren Daishonin first established the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Before that, however, he had referred to it simply as the Lotus Sutra. Before he did the speech at Seicho-ji, he was still on the same path of thinking. He had just not qualified Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. You understand what I'm saying? He had not declared my Buddhism. All right? Again, this is a matter of literal versus implicit meaning. The 5 priests viewed the Lotus Sutra only from the literal viewpoint, as did all scholars of those days. They understood the Lotus Sutra as Shakyamuni had expounded it, but they were ignorant of the true meaning of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, the Buddhism of sowing. The Daishonin's Buddhism underwent several important stages, President Toda is clarifying. First, he strove to propagate the invocation of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Then, during his exile on Sado Island, he inscribed the first Gohonzon. Finally, after returning from Sado, he made a will to the effect that he would entrust the construction of the sanctuary of the essential teaching to us, the people of the latter day of the law. He basically said, I'm leaving it up to you guys to actually accomplish Kosen Rufu. You understand that, right? That's our mission. That's the mission of the Bodhisattvas of the earth. We still good? Okay.
Yes.
Naturally, the 5 senior priests completely misunderstood the importance of the Gohonzon inscribed during and after the Sado exile. Only Nikko Nikko, founder of the head temple, knew the true significance and value of the Gohonzon, because he was the one disciple who had always been at the Daishonin's side serving the true Buddha. Toda's answer was precise and correct, but as the explanation concerned a very fine point of doctrine, he remained silent for a while, looking as if he was turning over his thoughts. He then continued, mentally comparing the present with the Kamakura period. He said, since there were very few means of communication in those days compared with our time, it was exceedingly difficult to convey the Daishonin's guidance. To add to this difficulty, the Daishonin first established the invocation, then inscribed the Gohonzon, and finally entrusted the construction of the sanctuary of the essential teaching to posterity, an interval of many years between each of these events. If these 3 supreme principles had been revealed all at the same time, it would have been much easier for the 5 priests to understand his Buddhism. At any rate, it was an age in which no one had even heard of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. I think the 5 priests deserve some credit for at least realizing the importance of the invocation in such a time. The 5 senior priests lived in different provinces, such as the leader of believers in their respective localities. As I have explained, however, they knew the significance of the invocation, but not that of the Gohonzon. Hence, Nikko Shonin's reprimand that since they understood the importance of the invocation, there could not be any reason they should not be able to comprehend that of the Gohonzon as well. In other words, you're not listening to me. Why do you think that the master left the Gohonzon? This is what he told me. This is what okay? They wouldn't listen to him. Okay? So he's saying, if you can understand Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, then there's nothing else that should limit you to be able to understand this point. All right? He says, when people died in those days, continuing, second paragraph on page 866, it was the religious custom to place a statue of Amida or Mahevachana Buddha within the coffin. The 5 priests, therefore, must have felt no sense of guilt in committing the Gohonzon inscribed by the Daishonin to the earth together with the body. What a silly and hopeless bunch of disciples! Alarmed, Nikko Shonin ordered that this blasphemous act should cease immediately and that all the Gohonzon should be brought to him. The order was duly executed. As I have said, the 5 senior priests comprehended the principle of the invocation, but not the essential importance of the object of devotion. In other words, they did not understand the profound doctrine of the threefold secret teaching. It is for this reason that today the Soka Gakkai constantly urges its members to study Nichikan's threefold secret teaching. While Nikko Shonin reproved the 5 priests for their errors, it was not in any way out of hatred against them. We must read the passages of Nikko Shonin's refutation against the 5 priests in this light. Okay? So in other words, again, if you ever read any of that doctrinal dissertation by Nico that was actually by Nichigen or whoever it was that actually put it down on paper for him, it's not to be considered some sort of a slander of the 5 senior priests, but a clarification of their misunderstanding and why. And do you know what the threefold secret teaching is? I know you do know, but I know you probably can't remember off the top of your head. Okay, it's from Nichikan is the threefold secret teaching guy. Okay, and what it is, it's based on the precepts of the school left behind by Nikko, Nikko, and the teachings obviously in the Gosho of Nichiren. But the threefold secret teaching is something of Nichikan's, his Buddhahood that brought forth. Again, that's why we call him the Great Restorer. That's why we chant to his Gohonzon, everybody. You know, the Gohonzon that those of us that practice as Soka Gakkai members since 1990, we all have. That Gohonzon was actually carved out by Nichikan Shonin. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a Nichikan. That's why I've always said, isn't it cool that Nichikan Shonin actually becomes the high priest of Kosen Rufu? Because that Gohonzon doesn't get switched out with a new high priest every high priest like they do with Nichiren Shoshu. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Nichikan's threefold secret teaching is the reality that out of all of Shakyamuni's teachings, the truth only exists in one place. It only exists in the Lotus Sutra and nowhere else. Okay? That's the first of the threefold secret teachings. The second of the threefold secret teachings is that out of the whole Lotus Sutra, the truth is not found anywhere in the first 14 chapters. It's only found in the second 14 chapters. So he separates the theoretical from the actual Shakyamuni and Honmon. He says, the truth is not found in Shakyamuni, the Shakyamuni portion, first 14 chapters of the Lotus Sutra. It's only found in the Honmon, second 14 chapters. And then the third of the threefold secret teaching, pardon me, it's in the 16th chapter. And it's not found on the surface of the 16th chapter. It's hidden in the depths as the third of the threefold. Okay, so you're right. I think it is the 16th chapter. Not fold. But it's the first, and I'll read it some other time. Okay. At any rate, continuing. He says, well, I guess that's about it. Have I given you a satisfactory answer? If I have not, go ahead and ask further. This kind of session is rare, you know. The questioner stood up, his head slightly inclined to one side. All eyes were turned upon him. For a moment, the man hesitated. This is the guy that asked the original question. Well, how could the 5 senior priests have not understood, right? He says, the questioner stood again, his head slightly inclined to one side. All eyes were turned upon him. For a moment, the man hesitated, uncertain whether to ask again. But apparently encouraged by Toda's smile, he began to speak as if he had finally made up his mind. I am sorry, sir, but I am not yet fully convinced. According to all accounts, even the 5 priests, for example, Nisho and Nichiro, seem to have accompanied the Daishonin on many of his propagation campaigns, converting quite a few non-believers. Also, according to reply to Niyama, which we've all read, when Oama implored the granting of the Gohonzon from the Daishonin, he rejected the request on the grounds that she was not eligible. On the other hand, he granted the Gohonzon to Niyama, though not completely without apprehension. Thus, the Daishonin was selective in matters concerning the Gohonzon. He dwells at great length on the Gohonzon in a number of gosho, such as the object of devotion for observing the mind and the real aspect of the Gohonzon. Even such an amateur as I can understand most of his explanations about the Gohonzon. Why is it then that those educated 5 senior priests failed to comprehend? The question was a reasonable question. Toda listened, nodding repeatedly until the question ended. That's another good question, he said, running his eyes over the audience. This is a very important matter. We are now engaged in fierce propagation activities. Now, again, don't forget, he's doing this lecture in 1953, before I'm even born. This is actually all being said before, personally, Tom is born. All right? Same here, though. said, this is a very important matter. We are now engaged in fierce propagation activities. Because of our campaign, we are being subjected to all sorts of slander. At a glance, our present plight appears to resemble that in which the Daishonin and his disciples found themselves. In fact, the situation was much worse 700 years ago. People in his day regarded the Daishonin's actions as something like subversive acts, hence the relentless persecution. Despite this suppression, however, neither Heino Seimin nor the regent could lay so much as a finger on the firm unity of believers during the lifetime of the Daishonin. Could never break them up. When he died, those in power availed themselves of this excellent opportunity to carry out another great oppression. So once the Daishonin had left Minobu, on his way down to where where he died at the Ikegami brothers' place. Okay, once the word got out that he had finally expired, life had left his body. The powers to be, Ryokan and all those other guys that had been opposing him that were still alive, realized this was the chance to break up his little group of believers. Okay, so a new round of persecution occurred. Okay, that occurred after Nichiren had actually already died. All right, so it was at this time that the 5 priests turned their back and fled. It wasn't before then. It was after the Daishonin had died that it was like, it's much easier to stay alive and say I'm a disciple of Tendai. Okay? Get it? Okay. They must have been scared out of their wits. Now, suddenly, the 5 leaders began to declare that they were followers of Tendai, as if to say, hey, we're not Nichiren's disciples. Nikko Shonin may well have felt righteous indignation against them. I've been pissed off too. How would you react if a horrible persecution should fall upon our organization? As long as I'm alive, you will be able to take it easy and say with pride, we will propagate the mystic law. We will attain Buddha, Kosen Rufu. But what if I should die tonight? President Toda is saying to this audience of young people. If after my death, those in power should put unbearable pressure upon this organization in an attempt to wreck it, I just wonder how many of you would still be bold enough to declare proudly, I am a member of the Soka Gakkai. I can think of how many of my personal friends bolted the minute that Nichiren Shoshu did exactly that. And then they were no longer, they couldn't hang. Morons. I am a member of the Soka Gakkai. There is no guarantee, and by the way, again, I only say that because I hope it's clear to you all now that everything that we enjoy today is not because of Nichiren Shoshu. Okay? It's because of the Soka Gakkai. There's a lot of people that have been hangers-on, like my friend in Southern California that Mr. Lee wanted to invite in. But it all starts, it all is based on, it all exists only because of Josei Toda and Makaguchi before him and subsequently President Ikeda. Because President Ikeda is the one that went out into the world and matched all this stuff and actually established President Toda's theoretical aspect into something that extended into the whole world. All right? So he says, there's no guarantee you would not choose to defend yourself by saying, I am a believer of Nichiren Buddhism, but not the Soka Gakkai. Or I'm a parishioner of the local temple. Propagation is the last thing I have in mind. Or I practice faith without belonging to any organization. Toda's eyes grew sharper. None of the members had so much as dreamed of a situation as their president had just hinted. Toda alone was always keenly conscious of such a crisis, but he kept it all to himself. Certainly while the Daishonin was alive, even the 5 senior priests must have considered it their objective to propagate the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. When their mentor died and the relentless persecution began, however, they apparently lost their determination, frightened now that they were bereft of their supreme leader. They were so cowardly that they tried to escape oppression by announcing one after another that they were followers of Tentai. Only Nikko, N-I-K-K-O Shonin, remained steadfast. Hence, his stern rebuke against the 5 backsliders. Nothing is more outrageous than calling yourselves Tentai's followers. We, the true disciples of Nichiren Daishonin, absolutely do not belong to the Tentai school. What we should propagate is the law of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, which is inherent in the life of the true Buddha from the infinite past and which was transferred to Bodhisattva superior practices. Toda paused for a moment, surveying the audience as if to make sure that they had understood thus far. Then he resumed his explanation. It is evident from ancient documents, that the 5 priests called themselves devotees of Tentai, losing all shame and decency. It is quite natural that Nikko Shonin severely reproached them. True, the Daishonin died, unleashing persecution from the government, but this does not in the least justify them identifying themselves with Tentai's followers. What cowards! What feebleness of will! Read the object of devotion for observing the mind, and you will find the unmistakable phrase, Nichiren, the Shramena of Japan. The Daishonin is in no way a follower of Tentai of China. What stupid disciples of the true Buddha they are to call themselves devotees of Tentai. He's talking about the 5 senior priests. And anybody else that chants Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, frankly, that doesn't perceive the Gohonzon for what it actually is. In his excitement, now this I like this paragraph because it describes me a little bit. It says, in his excitement, Toda unintentionally raised his voice. He remembered with anger that the errors of all the erroneous Nichiren schools had begun to germinate openly immediately after the Daishonin's death. He unconsciously spoke in vehement tones, though through his eagerness to imprint this historical fact indelibly on the listeners' minds as a grave warning for the future of the Soka Gakkai. Toda turned his eyes to the questioner. Did I make myself clear enough? He said, his usual friendliness already restored to his voice. Very clear, sir, replied the man. Thank you very much. The Class A lecture that Toda gave exclusively to new believers always provided his listeners with a deep understanding of the Daishonin's teachings. Ooh, don't cry, Tom. Along with this program, Toda constantly kept in touch with other members as well as leaders through the medium of Gosho lectures, injecting into them the essence of Buddhism. Every Friday, a Gosho lecture centering on the Gosho, every Friday, a general lecture centering on the Gosho was given in the Tomisha Public Hall. The meeting was open to anyone who had a mind to study, and the participants used to refer affectionately to this program as the Friday lecture. Every Friday evening, a large crowd gathered at the hall earlier than the scheduled time of opening and scrambled for seats. Even the aisles and stairs were filled. Those who could not gain entrance into the auditorium settled themselves under the stage. The underground classroom, in which members could see neither the lecturer nor the platform, was unbearably hot and stuffy, but not enough to dampen the eagerness of those nameless fighters who were there to seek the 2 ways of practice and study. Gosho in their hands, not a complaint escaping their lips, they listened intently to Toda's lecture that reached them through the loudspeaker. By this time, his lecture on establishing the correct teaching for the peace of the land had been published. The first in a series of Toda's lectures on selected important writings of Nichiren Daishonin to be made available in book form. Never available to people like us until the Soka Gakkai. None of this. Pardon me, I raised my voice. Using this material, Toda gave superb present-day interpretations to the historic thesis of Nichiren Buddhism, and earnest warning and remonstration with the regent. The listeners felt their hearts The listeners felt their hearts audibly throb, acutely aware that Kosarufu must be achieved at all cost. They also realized how much courage and patience and practice would be needed for that before that supreme object was fulfilled. Toward that end, Toda advanced in the vanguard of ever-intensifying activities, solidifying the basis for a soaring growth of the organization. On April 19, 1953, the first general meeting of the Young Men's Division was held at the Education Hall in Tokyo. A year and a half had already passed since the division was founded during a meeting at the Soka Gakkai headquarters in Kanda on July 11, 1951, amidst a torrential rain. Pardon me. The division of about 180 young men in its beginning had now increased its membership more than tenfold to 2,000. Everyone had worked frantically to expand and strengthen the division to the point where they had often forgotten food and sleep. The general meeting was attended by 700 high-spirited youths selected from among the members for this occasion. The meeting began at noon. The program was packed with an astonishingly large number of items. 13 members took the rostrum by turns, and with youthful zeal read papers on the subjects that they had studied after their daily activities were over. The speakers discussed, for example, the object of devotion, Shintoism, Christianity, communism, nationalism, and revolution. In fact, the subjects covered a vast field of research, ranging from criticism of existing religions to thoughts on the mission of the Young Men's Division as viewed from the point of world history. Whoa! All the past meetings of this kind had featured a long series of testimonials. This one was different. Study research took the place of testimonials, a sign of the positive posture with which the young men had begun to focus their critical eyes on society, rather than the benefits, the miracles that were happening, understanding the teaching so that others could understand the teaching. Toda was pleased with the fresh trend manifested at the general meeting. At the end of the program, he addressed the youth, strong emotion apparent in his face. What I wish to speak of now are the fundamental principles of our organization. First, I was greatly impressed with the presentation of your papers. This is exactly the type of plan that makes me happiest. If Mr. Makaguchi were here, his delight would exceed even our imagination. How I wish he were alive to catch even a glimpse of today's event. The mere thought of it moves me to tears. Second, the positive posture of youth is always a precious asset. All human lives contain two opposing qualities, progressivism and conservatism. When people become as old as myself or your parents, they begin to incline more and more toward conservatism. Conservatism. Yes. You are young, and youth is synonymous with an enterprising spirit of constantly seeking something new. It is this spirit that determines the happiness or unhappiness of man. Such a progressive attitude is to be found only in youthful lives. So while I know many of my friends like George are my age, some of you are younger. Some of you describe yourselves as young members or newer members. Always realize it's if you're fortunate enough to start practicing early in your life, realize that that is really the time to devote as much as you possibly can to your practice and to the development of your faith. Because that's a time when you'll have the energy to pursue that. When we get older, we become parents, we become, involved in our gig. We don't have those latitudes of choice. They're not as freely available to us. Take advantage of them while you can. Don't think I can learn about all this stuff later. once I finally become rich, once I finally don't have any more problems, once I finally become healthy. Take it on the moment you find out about Nam Myoho Renge Kyo and never stop. That's really the only way to do it. He says, his speech continued, Toda delved deeper and deeper into the essential nature of youth. He pointed out that for the progressiveness and energy of younger generations, neither the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha nor of Jesus Christ would have spread, nor would communism have flourished. Those two qualities, he emphasized, had always been prime movers that had brought changes to the history of the world. Again, talking about that youthful spirit and energy. These two qualities, he emphasized, had always been prime movers that had brought changes to the history of the world. Referring to the bitter fate of defeated Japan, he stressed that her destiny could not be redirected without the power of Buddhism. He then took upon the relation between science and religion, explaining that Buddhist doctrine is perfectly able to withstand the tests of scientific and intellectual scrutiny. True religion does not contradict science. What should we do to make all mankind happy? Buddhism is the philosophy that thoroughly probes this question and provides us with the highest teachings. How should we apply such teachings to our actual life, breaking the shackles of our fate? The answer is the Gohonzon, the very essence of the fundamental force of the universe. The Gohonzon is, so to speak, a machine that produces happiness for every one of us. After making this bold metaphor, Toda came to his conclusion in which he challenged the two powerful streams of thought in contemporary society. Finally, I want to speak briefly about capitalism and communism, because some of you may be wondering which of these political-economic stands you should take. For my part, I do not mind whichever you choose. These systems occupy only a small part of the entire field of human activity. In other words, the kinds of happiness they can bring to humankind is limited to political and economic aspects. The most essential of all philosophies is the philosophy of life itself. We shall guide the world along the correct path based on a philosophy far superior to all others. Okay? Do you understand what he's saying? Not based on political ideologies, based on a philosophical ideology that is the basis of all ideology. That's what he's driving at here. The most essential of all philosophies is the philosophy of life itself. We shall guide the world along the correct path based on a philosophy far superior to all others. That's what the Buddhism of sowing is. It's a philosophy far superior to all others. It is the basis of all other philosophies. We're talking about absolute myo versus relative myo, right? That's the whole basis of it. Ours is not a philosophy on the same level with capitalism or communism. It is the highest philosophy, one that opens to the future and leads all branches of science now existing in the world. It follows then that you as such are leaders of the world, he's saying to this young group of people, this group of young people. This 4-point speech that I have made is my first statement for the entire world. I sincerely hope that you will live up fully to my expectations. The first general meeting of the Young Men's Division, like a signal flare sent soaring into the sky, heralded an accelerated growth of the Soka Gakkai Youth Division. On that day, Toda, for all intents and purposes, commissioned the Youth Division members to become leaders of the world. He created in the fresh minds of young adults a feeling of dignity and pride. That feeling alone, of course, would not take them anywhere. It is the painstaking process of self-training and self-actualization accompanying such dignity and pride that makes a youth's life truly noble. Actual versus theoretical. The young men recognized that this process inevitably depended on the steadiness of their pure and persistent faith. For his own part, Toda needed the passion and energy of the young people whom he loved and trusted in order to continue the campaign unceasingly for the decades it would take to attain Kosen Rufu. He understood he's not going to do it as some dude all going on 60. On April 28th, good, I'm going to make it. All right. On April 28th and 29th, the head temple Taiseka-ji swarmed with 3,500 Soka Gakkai members who came to participate in the grand service to celebrate the completion of repair work on the 5-story pagoda. The previous July, Toda had requested permission to repair the 5-story pagoda, which had long remained in a ruined condition, time-worn and weather-beaten. When his request was approved by Nichiren Shoshu, because this is at Taiseka-ji, the 5-story pagoda is at the head temple. Now, after the, when his request was approved, he solicited sincere contributions from the members to finance the project. Now, after the passing of a half year, the repair work was finally completed. The treasure tower, which is what it looks like if you've ever seen the 5-story pagoda, it's in a very forested space, and it's just down from Toda and Makaguchi's graves. It's a very cool spot. Have you ever been to Taiseka-ji? Okay. I used to go there, and that's where I would go chill and hang out, because that's also just adjacent to where all the high priest tombs are, or whatever, the cemetery. He goes, when is the treasure tower, which is what was always kind of looked at, rose majestically in its new garb with the fresh vermilion and blue in brilliant harmony with the young green of the surrounding forest. Beautiful fruit of the efforts of one man who devoted himself to single-mindedly to the protection of the true law. Okay, so the treasure tower rose majestically in its new garb, the fresh vermilion and blue in brilliant harmony with the young green of the surrounding forest. Beautiful fruit of the efforts of one man who devoted himself single-mindedly to the protection of the true law. Do you understand what that sentence just said? Okay. Why did the 5-story pagoda get rebuilt at the head temple Taiseka-ji after it had fallen into ruin and disrepair for maybe over 100 years? Who knows how long it had been in that shape? Because of Josei Toda. He's the one that kept this thing going, came out of prison. Now he's got a young men's division, just had 2,000 members. They've just gotten the coin together to do the 5-story. This 5-story pagoda has been reborn because of the faith of an individual. This is the lesson for all of us. Toda didn't do a goddamn thing that any one of us can't do ourselves. He's no more special than any of us. That's a fact. Okay. On the night of the 28th, 800 members of the Young Men's Division stayed at Morinji Temple and eagerly waited for the informal meeting with their president to begin. Toda arrived at 7:30 amidst a resonant chorus of Wuchang Plain. Corps leader Morikawa acted as master of ceremonies, and the meeting proceeded in an enthusiastic and cheerful atmosphere. The excited participants asked one question after another. Toda readily answered them all, sometimes sternly, sometimes humorously, like a father talking to his children, providing the young men with fundamental knowledge about various branches of politics and economy. To the high-spirited participants, 1 hour with their mentor seemed to pass in an instant. When the meeting ended, they placed Toda on an improvised dais borne by 16 selected young men, the other members marching before and behind. You know, they've got him on 2 poles and like a little chair thing, right? 16 guys carrying Toda on their shoulders, right? The other Toda on an improvised dais borne by 16 selected young men. The other members marching before and behind moved toward Taiseka-ji a mile off, singing Wuchang Plain. Mount Fuji soared in magnificent silhouette against the moonlit sky. I can see this in my mind. The forest, near and far, wrapped in the misty veil of a spring night. The procession was greeted at the Sanmon Gate by 600 Young Women's Division. Sanmon Gate's a main entrance gate of Taisekaji. The chorus of Wuchan Plains surrounded through the night air. The young men carried Toda along the stone pathway to the treasure house. Perhaps no one sensed at the time the feebleness that had begun to gradually invade his body. After offering a brief silent prayer, he seated himself on the stone pavement before the treasure house and addressed the young men and women who had packed the open space. Now, what was the treasure house? It's where they kept the Daigo Hanzen before Shohondo. Today, the members of the Young Men's Division were kind enough to carry me on their shoulders from Myorenji to Taisekaji. I am deeply touched at this sincere deed. You may think that I'm harping on the same string, but truly my entire life is dedicated to the Gohonzon. I will make Nichiren Buddhism prevail throughout Japan without fail, and will further strive to propagate it, in the world. This I give you here and now as my lifelong pledge. I earnestly hope that you will share my determination and forge ahead with your utmost effort. Toda's brief speech was immediately greeted by a unanimous, "Yes, we will, sir." The vigorous response echoed through the night air, carrying beyond the luxuriant foliage of the tall Japanese cedars. When he returned to the Rikyogo, Toda received news that Shinichi's first son had been born earlier that day. As a token of his heartiest congratulations, Toda presented Shinichi with a fan that he had carried with him, with the following words inscribed with a brush: "A spring moon shares my delight at the birth of your child." The ceremony marking the completion of the repair work on the 5-story pagoda began at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on April 29th in the open space before the edifice. More than 3,500 Soka Gakkai members participated along with Toda. After several congratulatory addresses, Toda took the rostrum. The one and only objective of the Soka Gakkai is the attainment of Kosen Rufu. For what purpose? Today, the Japanese people groan under the severest of miseries. Other nations of the Orient also find themselves in the depths of destitution. We must save all these people from this hell and restore them to life. It is for this purpose that we are day and night exerting strenuous efforts. I feel rather awkward to be so highly praised for the tiny monetary offerings that we have made this time. He's talking about the contributions that were made to restore the 5-story pagoda. I resolve to dedicate in the future crystallizations of our sincerity 1,000 or even 10,000 times the size of our present contribution to Nichiren Shoshu, to Taisekaji. I ask all Soka Gakkai members to share my resolution and continue to fight for the propagation of the supreme law. It was a breezy day. Toda's heartfelt words coming through the loudspeaker reached every part of the head temple on the wings of the wind. Memories of the campaign that his organization had carried out, beginning with the septicentennial, exactly a year before, paraded through Josei Toda's mind. Now these combined initiatives had borne fruit too remarkable for anyone to overlook. Fruit in the form of unshakable peace and security in which the head temple found itself, and a solid basis on which the Soka Gakkai was about to leap into a greater future. The events of the past year, recalled like pictures on a revolving lantern, showed Toda the evidence of actual proof. There was not the slightest error in his prime point. The actual proof validated that. The awakening he had attained, there was not the slightest error in his prime point. The awakening he had attained in his prison cell. Okay, and so the next thing that I'm going to read to you from this, and we're going to take a brief skip on the human revolution, because as I promised, I'm going to go back and clarify a couple of things for a couple of people. But the next one will be chapter 8 from book 2. Pardon me, the next chapter, this is chapter 7. The next part of chapter 7 is called Under the Wings. This is what I'm going to read next to convey to you President Toda's spirit and his strictness, so that you understand strictness and you understand correctness. It's not arrogance when it's correct. So I'll let you listen to how President Toda expressed himself, and maybe you'll have a greater understanding of President Ikeda as a result of that. Thank you so much for being patient for a long video. Thanks. See you next week. Bye.